and welcome to Ask an Archaeologist. I'm Nico Tripsevich, the host of today's show. Ask an Archaeologist is a series of live-streamed interviews co-hosted by the Archaeological Research Facility and the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. We are currently interviewing archaeologists connected with the university at noon on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and we answer audience questions. This talk, we're going to be taking questions on the YouTube live chat field next to the side of the YouTube video window. Please locate the chat field to the right of your video screen. Today, I'm pleased to be speaking with Meg Conkey. She is a slightly retired professor of anthropology here at UC Berkeley. She's been a student of the cave arts and lifestyles of late Ice Age in France and Spain for more than 50 years, as well as interested in the feminist practice of archaeology. She is one of a very small number of archaeologists who have been inside the Chauvet cave in southeastern France. Welcome, Meg. Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here, Nico. And shall we just let her roll?
Yeah, I would love to hear about your work.
Okay, great. Here we go. We'll get this up. Okay. What I've decided to do today is talk a little bit about the Grotte Chauvet or the Chauvet cave and why it might be important. One could talk about this for hours and lots been published. So without further ado, I will just jump in here. Let's see. My goodness, how do I get this to go?
You might have to click the PowerPoint.
Oh, wow. I don't have the PowerPoint up. There we go. Okay. So Grotte Chauvet, a grotte is in French is a cave. And here's what a view of inside the Chauvet cave does look like. And it's located in the southeastern part of France, as Nico said. You can see the arrow here. It was discovered in December 1994 by Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire. And we can talk later, if we have time, about how it was actually discovered. You can see a lot of other cave art sites distributed around southwestern France and along the north coast of Spain. It is a cave, and the entrance to the cave, the original entrance to the cave, collapsed around 20,000 years ago. But before that, people had gone in and at least two different time periods created amazing images, amazing to us, on the cave walls. You can get a little bit of a sense of the cave here with a picture of Monsieur Chauvet in front of one of the panels, one of the more famous sets of panels of the imagery, with the amazing horses up here on this side, and some more recent, not as early images over here.
Fantastic. Those are really beautiful.
It's been well known that for over 120 years, people here have accepted the fact that people of ancient times went into caves and they painted, they drew, they engraved, and did all sorts of activities. Many of them that we notice are the animals, but there were lots of other kinds of images and geometrics and things like that as well. And just to put a little bit about who these people were over many years, they went in and out of caves for over 25,000 years. They were hunters and gatherers. They were fairly what we would call nomadic. They were on the move, but they definitely well adapted and really connected to their landscapes and to their homescapes. And although there have been some recent claims that even our predecessors, biologically predecessors, Neanderthals, made some cave art, the methods in that study are still under considerable contestation. And so we really only have really good and solid evidence that this cave art was made by our biological species. We are anatomically modern humans. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, or Homo doubly wise. I don't think we're very doubly wise these days, but anyway, we definitely think a lot of ourselves. And as you can see from this map, just a number of the different cave sites that are known, about 300 by now, have been discovered. The first ones that were discovered were in the late 19th century, but these were not accepted as being of real genuine antiquity until just the turn of the century in 1902. So let's look at some of the images in the Chauvet cave. They were done mostly in charcoal, which is the black, and they were also done in some red colors, which is primarily a ochre, red ochre, or a hematite. These are minerals. And the wonderful thing about the fact that they did so many of these images in Chauvet in charcoal is that charcoal is organic and can be dated by the carbon-14 method. Whereas if they'd use manganese, which many other cave paintings are in, it's a mineral, as is the ochre, and they're not datable by, certainly not by carbon-14 methods, and other kinds of methods have to be used. But a lot of cave art is not dated because it has been done in minerals, and we don't have some of the direct ways of dating. Certainly can't date the minerals, but we can date other aspects of the locations and the context and the cave walls and so forth. And before I show any more of these and talk a little bit about them and take your questions, I will show at the end of my slides today the correct link for you can actually enjoy 28 minutes of walking through the cave, a fantastic 3D movie that was made by Martin Marquet and others called The Final Passage. And this is only available free to the world until June 7th. So if you're inspired at all by this talk and you haven't seen this film or you want to see it again, be sure to think about that. So one of the things about Chauvet that has, everybody, it's the cave of surprises, as many people have said. They have taken samples for almost 200 dates. Some of them are a little problematic and so forth. So they've only used the ones that they feel really secure about, but still, for an archaeologist to have 150 viable dates is just like a gold mine because of course you can see where there might be errors and so forth. And so we really see that people went in the cave and left images on the walls around 36,000 years ago before the present, and calibrated, as we say, archaeological dates. And then later on in the 20,000s, 25, 24,000 years ago before present. And of course, for everybody, this antiquity was really destabilizing. And there's still many people who say they don't believe the dates can possibly be that old. But I must admit, with 150 to more good ones, it's going to be kind of hard to sort of not accept the dates.
That's right.
This is the area where the cave is located. It's in the Ardèche, the gorges of the Ardèche. You can see some of the landscape and the prominence of the limestone. And then down here in the other image here, you can see this long little path that one has to walk to go up to the cave entrance up here, further up the cliff. So it's quite, to get there, you have to walk across a vineyard and all the way up here and so forth. So it's quite a trek. It's really good. It's also a place where there's a natural phenomenon called the Pont d'Arc, or the arched bridge. It's a natural bridge, again, out of the limestone through which the river flows. And the little town of Vallon-Pont d'Arc is the closest small town to where the cave was found. And so actually, over the years, the name of the cave has changed from the Grotte Chauvet to the Grotte Pont d'Arc to the Grotte Chauvet Pont d'Arc. So it's a little confusing, but just to give you a sense of the landscape. And surely this kind of arc was there in the landscape when people were going there 30-some and more thousand years ago, and probably formed quite an impression on them in terms of the wider landscape within which the cave was found.
Mm-hmm.
So what is important about this site, which is the sort of topic for today? And one of the things is, well, you might say, oh, it's because it's so old. Well, it's interesting indeed that there are quite a few sites around the globe now with dates, for example, in Southern Africa, 21 to 26,000 years ago, where they've got a painting on a couple of rock slabs. And of course, in Australia, as soon as people get there, it does look like they're starting to put images on walls at, 40,000 years ago. And more recently, there's been quite a spectacular find, and of all places, in Borneo, where there is an image of an animal in a red color on the wall, and that's been really well dated through a special technique called uranium thorium that looks at the calcite coverings that go over the paintings that form in caves. And it looks like it might even be older than Chauvet. So the age is not going to sell it as the oldest in the world. And what many of us are excited about is it means that even though Chauvet is fantastic, it is not the origins of art. There's not a single origin of art, but it's really a global phenomenon that as soon as modern humans get to all of these different places, for many of them, doing some image making and some way of expressing themselves through images, oftentimes, luckily for us, preserved on cave walls, seems to be part of the behavioral package, if you will, of what modern humans were doing as they colonized the world. Here you can see some of the amazing pictures, again, from Chauvet, which may be the thing that sets it apart, at least at the moment, given that the Borneo is a few images, and in South Africa, it's a few images and so forth. So, one thing may have to do with the abundance and the diversity and the, apparent to us skill of some of these artists. So you can see on the left, again, a group, you can see a lion here, you can see this horse here, and part of a mammoth on a aurochs or a wild cow over here. And you can see here this amazing image, well done image of a horse. Obviously, these people knew these animals. They knew them ethologically, that is in terms of their behavior and their anatomy, and were able to represent them quite faithfully, if you will. So indeed, as I was suggesting, the abundance and diversity of the images in Chauvet have yet to be matched, but we have to keep our minds open. You never know what archaeologists are going to discover, which is one of the fun parts about it for sure. And so let's look at a couple more of the images. And again, as I say, hopefully you'll be able to see a lot of them, especially in the very important context of the cave. These are not like galleries where you have an image and you just put it up on the wall. There's a whole dynamic between the surface of the cave, the shape of the cave, and the way in which certain images are placed, how they are inspired, if you will, by the shape and forms of the cave walls. So you can see up here a rhinoceros partly engraved and with this interesting black band on the torso. Nobody in rhino studies knows much about why there would be a black banded rhino. You can see also some of these amazing cave lions. This is at one end of a magnificent frieze that appears to be depicting a hunt of bison by the lions. And so you can see how this is amazing. And, for a long time, we've always thought, well, there certainly aren't any scenes that we can identify that made any sense to us in much of the Paleolithic art. But this is probably one of the strongest examples of what looks like a scene where the bison are being chased by the lions. And in one image, there's a picture of a lion on the rump of a bison. So they're after them, that's for sure, in this particular scene, whatever it meant to the image makers. Yeah. Here's another interesting one where you see these red dots, perhaps an outline of an animal with a large hump here and a head here and underbelly and so forth. And but what was interesting is when these researchers looked very closely as to how they were made, they see that they were actually made by putting the palm of the hand in a red pigment, the hematite or ochre, and then putting their hand all across the surface to make this sort of image. And so when you think about the making of these, this to us is a very performative kind of thing where they're definitely touching, making contact with the cave wall for whatever purposes. People speculate, maybe it's part of thinking that behind the wall there are spirits of some sort and that they're connecting with them in some way by doing this kind of performative making. So sometimes we have to think about how important the making of it was, not just what they made, but the process of making may be as much a part of the imagery and what it might mean as the actual result.
Well, this is wonderful, Meg. Can I stop you for a moment? We have a few
Sure.
questions that have come
Right.
in.
Right.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to remind everyone that they can post questions into the live chat box on the YouTube stream. Here's a couple of questions. First, how deep are these images? Are they all in one area of the cave?
No, the cave is quite large. Let me I can advance here to there's a map of the cave. The cave is 8,400 square meters, so it's really large. And again, you'll really be able to see that if you look at the film, the final passage. The probable entrance to the cave is down here indicated at the bottom, but today one lands at a different location. And of course, when they found it, they didn't know where the original entrance was, because they certainly didn't just walk into it. That's another whole story. And so you can see there's a long extent of all of these, where these images are placed all around.
And another question was, can you tell if each scene was created by one artist or multiple people?
Right, that's a very good question. In fact, some of the research does show that some of the images were most likely done by the same hand, and that there's sort of adjustment between where one image is and another one is, that they sort of accommodated it while they were working on it. So especially those famous horses, and I'm trying here to think about how I can back up. Let's see. It gets back to these horses. Anyway, well, that I have in the very beginning, these famous horses over here really look like they were done by the same person. And it's interesting that there's a whole history to that particular cave wall, where they originally had cave bears in there who got up and scratched on the wall. And then they put some images on it, and then somebody came in and scratched off the previous image and then put the horses on there one at a time. So the researchers have figured out how all of this was done, the steps and the process and the phases and so forth have been done. Another question, is there another question?
Well, there was one that just came in. Science Videos for Kids asks, is this all one cave?
As far as we know, that's a great question. If you know anything about limestone caves, you know they can collapse and fall and change. They're very active and dynamic. And we certainly know in some cases, for example, a set of caves in the French Pyrenees, where they're trying to decide whether it's all one cave or a place that's all open today. Was it once separate caves? As far as they can tell, and they've done enormous geological studies. You know, we're talking now about a site that's been investigated since 1995. So we've got those many years, and the geology has been very, very important in trying to understand which panels, which walls were actually painted, and also where people might have gone and went and what they did inside the cave. But as far as we can tell, this is one big, vast cave.
I've got a question. How do the bones of animals found in the cave relate to the art? Are they different animals or same animals?
Well, most of the bones in the people never really lived there. They didn't eat there. They didn't sleep there. They didn't make meals there. They made fires there because that provided the source of the charcoal. But most of the animal bones found in the cave are those of cave bears. And so these were kind of, humans and bears were trying to share some space over the millennia. And I'm not sure I would want to go in, whether I was highly motivated to, express my important desires on a cave wall painting if I knew that there were some cave bears in there.
Those were bigger than grizzlies and bigger than Alaskan browns, right?
Right. Well, they
large bears.
And they definitely, left a presence, not only bones, but also with their clawings on the walls of the cave. You can definitely see where they've been, and some of the paintings are under them and some of the paintings are over them. So there was definitely a back and forth between humans and cave bears.
Well, here's a question about the experience of being there. I know the general public isn't allowed in the cave, but I've been in other caves in southern France, and the experience was so moving. Can you talk about the personal experience of being in the Chauvet cave?
Well, it is absolutely overwhelming, both because of the vastness, the dark. I mean, we have small lights, but if you turn them off, it is dark. And then there's the quiet, and you can maybe hear slight sounds of dripping water and so forth. It's really, it's just, yes, it's an amazing experience. They have done an excellent job. They've built a wonderful replica on the hill above the site. I'll shift to that, which was open to the public. Here you can see, here's the hillside. Here's this big structure they've built on the top of the hill. They've done an amazing replica, and the results, people have done a big study interviewing people as they come out, and they have lost themselves emotionally and sensorially in the replica. So I think it's, really, if one can get there, once we all might travel again to this part of southeastern France, you would really have the possibility of that kind of amazing experience that you've experienced, the questioner, in going into other caves. Yeah, it is. It's unbelievable. Yeah, right.
Wonderful. Here's another question. Can you tell who did the designs, the art by the fingerprints?
That is a good question. As far as we know, they were not leaving much in the way of fingerprints on the wall. They were using pieces of charcoal as sort of drawings, crayons, really, kind of thing. And of course, with the handprints of the little making an animal without all those handprints, don't leave quite the same thing in terms of replicas or possibilities of making inferences from the patterning on the bottom of your hands. Archaeologists have elsewhere used fingerprints on making of clay, ceramics, things, and other kinds of materials where they've left embedded fingerprints, but we haven't been able to do any of that in this particular cave. At least at the moment, there isn't any obvious evidence for that.
Someone asks that they hear that there have been footprints found on part of the floor of the cave preserved from the time when some of the paintings occurred,
Right.
and they indicate that people may have been dancing. Is this true?
Well, we would love to think about things like that. One of the things, of course, is that, when you're in a cave, we don't know how, sometimes the floors are slippery and slidey and wet and so forth. And also, there are not enough footprints to give us several, indications, so it's, but I mean, if I felt more comfortable about being in a cave, which of course we're not really well suited to, haven't had a lot of experience unless you're a formal spelunker, but you're probably wearing boots, to feel so buoyant and joyous that you would dance in a cave, right?
Well, in Chauvet, you're confined to a small walkway, right? So
exactly, yes.
Not a lot of dancing.
Yes, right. Well, the decision, and let me see if I have a, right, see. Here, you can see on the show on the right, originally, the three people who went in and discovered it followed a route through the cave, and they decided, in order to preserve any tiny bit of evidence that might help us in understanding what went on over the years, to make sure that everybody only walked on that path where the three discoverers had walked. And they originally did it with black plastic, and now they've got these metal sidewalks. You can see some of them in one of the areas descending into the cave. But this is where the, Chauvet, Brunel, and Hilaire walked themselves. So they've really tried to hold to that. And because there's so many tiny pieces of evidence, a bone here, a fragment there, that footprint, for example, and a piece of a tool that might indicate what we might understand about who the people were in terms of their material culture. And of course, in so many of the caves that were discovered in the early part of the 20th century, nobody was paying attention to any of those kinds of things. So in a way, one can say that it was a blessing that Chauvet was discovered by the time we realized that we really have to be careful, and we really have to preserve as much possible evidence as we can, not just for understanding the cave today, but for future generations.
And that it was sealed, that people 10,000 years ago didn't get in, right? It was sealed for 20,000 years.
Right,
It's
exactly. Yeah, right. I mean, and the only way that they got in now was because of the discovery, which was, really, it was not quite by chance, but let's see if I can.
Can tell us about how it was found.
Right, yeah, go back here to the, what did I do here to get back? Right, so this is the little entrance, the little hole that the discoverers managed to get in. They were out, they're spelunkers, they look for caves. Chauvet himself was sort of hired locally by the local heritage people to keep an eye on, various kinds of other caves in the region with some art and evidence of human occupation at this time. And they were going along the cliff face and they felt a little breeze, which means there's a hole, it means there's something behind it. So they decided to explore, and I think they sent her, Eliette, in first because she was the smallest among them, into a little hole. And she went in, she went a ways, and then realized that it dropped down below her. So she got a spelunker's ladder, they managed to get into her. And then she dropped it down, and that's how they found it. So you can see that in order to make an entrance for people to go in, to even authenticate the cave, to do the preliminary research and so forth. So when I visited in 1998, this was the kind of entrance. It was, you can see a cable for electricity, and they just really blasted through the area. And then when I went again in 2012, the entrance was much more organized. It had a gate. It was much more safe and so forth. It was their original one is something I never would have done myself, that you go along a narrow passageway for about 7 meters, and then there's a big hole, and then you drop down. And the way they tell the story is that the hole they went through was so narrow they couldn't pull themselves through where their elbows would come out. They would just have to go straight forward like that. So not knowing where they were going, right?
That's right. Yeah. And then they had to rappel or use a ladder.
Yeah. And use their ropes, but I mean, they were spelunkers. They sort of knew what they were doing in that regard, but still, because even today, you can see, here's how one had to get in originally. But today, of course, there's now, one wears a harness that attaches you to a metal something. So if you fall or slip on the ladder, you don't just drop to the floor. And you wear helmets and with a light on the top and descend down a series of several connecting ladders.
Someone asks, how many paintings are in the cave?
Oh, hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, hundreds. Yeah, right. And of course, it's very difficult to say what constitutes a single painting, So, for example, if you can see where all the different places are, the different panels and so forth. But if you go back and look at, so, how do you decide how many paintings are in this frieze? So there's, they've definitely tallied up the different animals that are replicated, how many lions, how many bison, how many wild ox, how many horses. And then there are a lot of strange signs, something that looks like the shape of a butterfly, but it's probably not a butterfly, but it means something to them. And there are some hand imprints and other red dots and things like that.
It's notable that the animals that travel in groups, and horses and lions are shown in groups, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, many of these, I think very few, well, very few of the Ice Age animals like that were solitary. Probably bears were more solitary than these herd animals, exactly, right?
And is it true that there was a Pleistocene hyena in the area?
Yes. Well, let's see if I happen to put that picture in. This is the one here that people had thought that this bear and that this was a hyena. I think specialists are pretty convinced that it's just another version of a bear done by somebody who, like my level of skill, that maybe wasn't as able to render it so realistically bear-like. But yeah, so this is the one that they thought was a hyena.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful. Well, the forms are so striking. It's really a incredible talent. And the fact that they preserved this tradition for so many thousands of years, it's really striking that they...
Right. Well, one has to debate whether or not it's a tradition. I mean, clearly people were engaged in putting animal images on cave walls, among other images, for many, many years. But whether or not it's a tradition in the sense that we think of it as a, culturally intended, passed on down, no two caves are exactly the same. There's a lot of sort of and even the people who've done the research in the Chauvet cave say that one of the things that makes it so sort of unique is that there's this dialogue between the shapes on the cave walls and the images that appear there, that in some ways the cave itself is sort of evoking or suggesting an image to be made. And that what makes Chauvet look different from anything else is, of course, the assemblage of animals, the way in which they're done, and so forth. So there's no, in a sense, it's not like making a ceramic pot and putting the same decoration on it over and over again. Each cave has its own sort of personality.
That's right. And are there any human forms evident?
No. The people were there. And maybe the animals were the people. I mean, we just don't really know. They may have been individuals or groups that identified or related to or whatever. I mean, after all, don't we have things like the Bulls basketball team or the Lions football team or whatever. Yeah.
And well, do you think that certain people, here's a question, do you think certain people were designated as artists, or was it a skill that all dwellers cultivated? Do these paintings predate spoken language?
Right. Well, these people had spoken language, I can assure you. These were modern humans. They had our same brains, and there's probably, given the kinds of things that Neanderthals, who are extraordinarily successful people, they probably had a really good way of communicating that was precise. So we're talking about people who had, there's just no reason to believe they didn't have the full expression of language that we have or think we have. That's a challenging question about whether there were schools of artists, whether they traveled around regions, or whether there were individuals. I would imagine to a certain extent there were individuals, but of course what we have to ask ourselves is, we don't know what the intent was here. For us, we have an overburden of thinking that we have to produce an image that is very naturalistic and that it represents a particular identifiable image, like the horse on the right. But is this attempt down here below this dotted bear, is this somebody who didn't have the same sort of ability, or do they not even care? I mean, we have instances where images from the Ice Age have been destroyed, have been crossed out, have been intentionally, little statuettes that have been intentionally broken, intentionally thrown back into the fire. So, we really have to watch out for putting our own notions about some of these things. We are in awe of this material precisely because it conforms so well to some of our aesthetic expectations and our aesthetic qualifications for what makes amazing art. So we have to just be a little careful about that.
Let's see. Looks like the clock is at 12:35, so
Okay.
should conclude. But perhaps do you have any final thoughts or comments?
Well, I do want to just give everybody the link and my sort of lessons, which are never to underestimate the skills and practices of our ancestors. That as archaeologists, we have to be prepared for surprises. We also have to think about future generations and that we may not have all the answers. So we actually, sort of need to leave things for others, which is why everybody's so frustrated about not being able to go into Chauvet. If you started letting people in, it would just be awful. But do watch the final passage. You can visit it at www.terraexpo.com just between now and June 7th, when it will no longer be freely available. So do that. And we hope we might have another showing of when life opens up again. Here at Berkeley, we showed it in December 2015, and we're hoping to be able to do it again once the world is on the move. And but in the meantime, it's a window of opportunity to walk through for 28 minutes the Chauvet Cave.
That's right. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. I remember seeing it up at the Lawrence Hall of Science, right?
Right, that's where we showed it. Yeah, right. Thanks to Martin Marquet, and who's the filmmaker and the producer of this film. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much, Meg Conkey. It's been wonderful to have you on.
Great, enjoyed it so much.
Yeah, and thank you to the viewers and listeners and the people who sent in questions. I want to invite everyone to join us for the next Ask an Archaeologist tomorrow, May 20th, Wednesday at noon, for What Can Human Bones Tell Us About Epidemics in the Past, with Jose Luis Marrero Rosada, a graduate student in the UC Berkeley Department of Anthropology. Thanks again, Meg.
Thank you.